Now let us move on to the next point of discussion, which is known as factors shaping nonverbals. There are several factors that shape nonverbal communication, and I have tried to enumerate them in this manner. The first one is culture, then there is gender, and then there are individual differences. The first thing that comes here in this discussion is culture. Now, this is a heavily loaded term. According to Raymond Williams, culture is the whole way of life. And it is very, very difficult to define culture, because everything, whatever we see here, whatever we see around us, is a part of culture, or can be a part of culture. It is how we live. It's the whole way of life, as per Raymond Williams' famous words go. So culture plays a huge role in communication. Some particular cultural gestures are very important, and they differ from one culture to the other. Suppose one gesture is considered to be obscene in one culture, it may be a gesture of merriment or a gesture of joy in another culture, a gesture of victory maybe in another culture. So from one culture to the other, it varies a lot. The non-verbal communication varies a lot. The non-verbal small elements which are there in the non-verbal communication, they vary a lot from culture to culture. It is just the same way in which language varies. Some words mean differently in some other, in particular culture. Those words may mean completely different in some other culture. So culture actually is shaped by, and also it shapes language. And non-verbal communication is also about language. So that's why these varying nature of non-verbal signs are there. There are two things in language that are extremely important, and here I would refer to Ferdinand de Saussure and his concept of sign, that how Saussure defines sign, that sign is the combination of signifier and the signified. So if that is so, then in non-verbal communication also there would be signifiers and there would be signified. Now, according to Saussure, signifier would be the verbal sound or the visual image, and in case of non-verbal communication it may be a hand movement. So this particular movement, hand movement, may mean something. It may appear to be a signifier of something, and the concept that it would generate in our mind would be the signified. And language works through this combination of signifier and signified, and for verbal communication it is completely arbitrary. In non-verbal communication it is sometimes not that much arbitrary, and the relation is quite often very, very complex and varied in nature. I won't go into those things, but primarily language and culture are extremely related to each other, and that's why there are several cultural differences, several linguistic differences. Now, the next thing that comes here in our discussion is gender. Now, this is again a very, very problematic category. Gender. How would you define gender? According to Judith Butler, gender is performative in nature. And there is definitely a distinction between gender and sex. Sex is the biological category, and gender is a social category. Now, according to the recent feminist scholarship, sex is also discursive in nature. Sex is the discursive zone through which we come to terms with our desire. That is what the latest scholarship says. But our concern is gender, and that is absolutely a social category, which is determined by our society, which is determined by the ways in which we are indoctrinated. That is to say, I am an individual, but then I am also a man, and who has learned to be a man, who has been indoctrinated to be a man. I have to behave in certain ways so that I can be a man in the society. And that is my gender role that I require to perform all the time. And same thing happens with women. a woman learns to be woman. And there is a famous line from Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex, that one is not a woman but becomes a woman. So Simone de Beauvoir beautifully summarizes the entire idea of gender, that gender is a thing that is a social construct. It is an indoctrination. We go through that process of indoctrination and we acquire our gender. We come to know about our gender roles, and that we do pretty often. We do that unconsciously. Now, gender also plays a major role in nonverbal communication. Women's role in the society in terms of their gender determine their nonverbals a lot. Women are considered to be chronologically less empowered, so that's why their nonverbal communication also reflect the same way, especially in rural areas where we find extremely disempowered women. Their nonverbal communication is markedly different from that of women living in urban areas. So this is how nonverbal communication gets conditioned by the existing gender dynamics in the society. The next thing that comes is individual differences. Now, this happens when we have difference of opinion. Some people are extrovert in nature, and their extrovert attitude is reflected through their nonverbal behavior. They are usually more akin to produce loud gestures. They would enlarge their hands, they would spread their hands, they would read others' nonverbal signs in a more in a stronger way. So individual differences matter a lot in case of nonverbal communication. Now, there are two things which are very, very important in nonverbal communication. One is channel and another is cue. In nonverbal communication, there can be several channels through which we communicate. Now, face can be one channel through which we communicate a lot, and facial expressions in case of nonverbal communication, facial expressions are considered to be a thing which is easily decoded by many of the people. And if face is a channel, what is a cue then? Facial expressions become cues, and there should be a congruence between channel and cue. In both nonverbal expressivity and nonverbal sensitivity, that is to say, while we decode the message, we have to be congruent. We have to make our channel and cue congruent together. And in case of nonverbal sensitivity, the same thing should happen. We should have that congruence between the cue and the channel. So that is why the congruence between channel and cue is very, very important in terms of nonverbal expressivity and nonverbal sensitivity. That is to say, while we decode the message or we encode the message, we have to have congruence. We have to look for congruence between channel and cue. Like there should be a congruence of face and facial expression. That should be there. Moving on to the next. These two things, nonverbal expressivity and nonverbal sensitivity, result in increased proficiency. In the world of communication, this is our goal. We should be proficient enough. We should be able to communicate properly. And if we can manage these two parts of nonverbal communication, which is one is known as nonverbal expressivity, another is known as nonverbal sensitivity, we would have increased proficiency. That is to say, we will be able to achieve our goals in a better way. We will discuss this later at length in terms of making presentations and then group discussions, performances in group discussions, and also in interviews, how to make an impression in an interview. We will discuss that also. So why do we use nonverbal communication? It is used for creating desired identities and managing communication episodes. We want to create a desired identity. in this world. And that's why we like social media so much. We want to tailor make a kind of an image, a self-image. We want to project that image all the time, and we want to nurture that image. We want to believe. We want people to believe that we are like that, and that's why we are always after this desired identity. And these kind of tendency is always there in us. And at times it is very much goal-oriented. When we are appearing for an interview, we are trying to portray a desired identity. We cannot be ourselves. Sometimes it may be that the person can be himself or herself, but most of the time, because of tension, because of pressure, the person cannot be himself or herself. So at that time, that question of desired identity comes into play. The person has to make a mark in front of the interviewer. So how can that person make that happen? Only through non-verbal communication, and in sync with that, we should have verbal communication. And together, using those two things together, we can make a mark and we can create our desired identity. And also, we can govern what we mean by communication episodes. If there is a discussion going on, a meeting going on, we want to have a dominant role in that meeting. We want to make an impression in that meeting, and we want to control the things that are happening in that meeting. And that particular communication episode we try to govern through verbal communication and also through non-verbal communication. That we will handle when we will discuss power dynamics, how it is connected with non-verbal and non-verbal communication. And we will try to have a discussion regarding the components, regarding the different forms of non-verbal communication and the power dynamics. And it would be very, very interesting, I hope. Now let us come to the next section of this presentation, which is known as forms of non-verbal communication. There are primarily four forms of non-verbal communication. The first one is known as kinesics, the second one is proxemics, and the third one is chronemics, and the fourth one is haptics. There are other forms also. I would try to mention them later, like vocalics is there, which we will deal with in a couple of minutes. Now, first let us talk about kinesics. Kinesics is a semiotic field where we deal with hand movements, body movements, head movements. That is primarily, it is a semiotic field which deals with the movement in the body. It deals with gestures, facial expressions, postures, eye contacts. So kinesics is a huge field, and it's a semiotic field. Semiotics means the system of signs. It denotes the system of signs. And there are several components in this field, and one is gesture, another is facial expression, another is posture, and others are eye contacts. These all are extremely important in the field of kinesics. First, gesture. There can be several ways in which we can categorize different gestures. One would be iconic, metaphoric, and beats. Iconic gestures are gestures which resemble the object, what the object that the gesture represents. If the gesture resembles that object, it becomes iconic, according to one research work. It becomes metaphoric when a gesture expresses an abstract idea. Sometimes we have a tendency to behave, to make gestures which express abstract ideas. Suppose we are using our hands to express our idea, and we want to convey a new idea. So we present our hand in this manner, that there's a new idea coming, and this actually metaphorically represents the flourishing of a flower. It denotes the proliferation of a flower, and this proliferation of flower is metaphorically associated with the proliferation of new idea. So in that way, this gesture of doing this kind of a gesture by while expressing a new idea becomes metaphoric in nature. Then what are beats? Beats are the rhythms. Sometimes when we speak, we use our hands to denote the rhythm of the speech. If we say, this goes on and on and on, and the way in which we are doing this, we are moving our hands like this, this actually denotes that we are trying to signify the rhythm of the speech. This goes on and on and on, and continuously with every on, we are moving our hand. And this particular gesture is known as beats. So we get 3 types of gestures here. Then there are other categorizations of gesture, where they call some gestures emblems, some illustrators, some regulators, some affect displays, some adapters. What are emblems particularly? Emblems are again like iconic gestures. Emblems represent the thing itself, the thing that it tries to denote. It represents it. It tries to replicate it. Illustrators are also, in a way, support what we speak. If we are trying to say that it is big, we show that. So we are illustrating at that time. We are showing the size. So in that way, we are trying to give illustrative gestures. We are trying to denote illustrative gestures, like this is big or this is small. So we are doing this. These are illustrations. These are illustrators. These are commonly known as illustrators. Then there are regulators. When the speaker moves on to the next point, the speaker changes his hand movement. Suppose before that, the speaker was using his hand in a particular way. He was continuously doing this. And then, before going into the next point, he stops doing that. So that particular movement where he stops or where he changes his hand movement is known as regulator, because it regulates the speech. It denotes when the speech ends or changes. So in that way, they are regulating the entire conversation. And it happens many a times we do it unwittingly, unknowingly. But if we practice it,